Stop playing into the hands of the elites, of the politicians, of the top bankers at the too-big-to-fail banks, of the hedge fund billionaires, the Federal Reserve, and everyone who benefits from the whole economic and financial structure of the United States. The very policies that they're claiming are necessary to save the economy and the country during the coronavirus outbreak, all the trillions of fresh money they're pumping in, all the bailouts, all these measures which they've done before in one guise or another, dressed up under one acronym or another, ZERP or TARP or QE, whatever it was, it's the same crap, but on a far bigger level now, and it will have the same effect in the end. It will continue to erode away the wealth of the middle class, whatever wealth it still has after these last few decades, and it will further exacerbate the wealth gap in this country. More and more of the middle class will be pushed into the ranks of the formerly middle class. In other words, there'll be the new additions to the lower class. Eventually, there will be a truly elite class, like an elite class, separated from a vast lower class by a huge chasm of wealth disparity. There will almost be two separate economies at that point, much like occurred in the late Roman Empire, when the impoverished lower classes had to revert to a barter system and had essentially already become a medieval society even before the official end of the Roman Empire. When the new money is created by these policies, all these trillions, it's inflation. Rising prices are simply a symptom of inflation, not inflation itself. And when this inflation occurs, who gets the money first? None other than the largest too-big-to-fail banks, the top financial institutions, and the largest corporations, as well as Wall Street and all the top investors and money guys. They can use that money to speculate in the stock market and buy other assets, namely your assets. That new money hasn't filtered down through the economy yet, and so it hasn't caused prices to rise. Only when the money gets down to you has that inflation really begun to show up in prices. In the last 10 years, much of that inflation has gone into financial assets, like stocks and bonds, or into housing prices, propping up all of those asset markets. As Ben Bernanke himself stated, was the intention of this inflationary monetary policy. He stated this before Congress itself. And holders of these assets like it when these kinds of prices go up, of course, so no one had too much of an objection at the time. Also, a lot of the inflation ended up shipped overseas through our massive trade deficits. Well, this time, the massive injections of money into the system will not have the same effect. There's only so many times the Fed and Congress can pump the stock market, bond market, housing market, etc. back up. Basically, the whole bubble economy. It takes more and more inflation to do this, each time with less effect. But it leaves us with mountains of additional debt, and larger unreducible deficits, and greater economic imbalances and inefficiencies in the economy. This is all terrible stuff, but it's made even worse for the middle and lower classes in that during the huge recessions that these monetary inflationary policies induce, the elite class, the politicians, the bankers, Fed officials, the big money guys, they're all able to make out like bandits, taking advantage of the fact that so many people in the middle and lower classes are forced to liquidate so many of their own assets, whether stocks or bonds or houses, at much reduced prices. A perfect time for the elites to swoop in and buy up these discounted assets at a great bargain for themselves, thus further stripping the already reduced share of assets from the middle and lower classes, and adding to the ever-increasing collection of assets held by the top 10%, 5%, 1%, whatever percent you want to use. You see how this works? The powers that be set up a monetary and fiscal system through which a bubble, or multiple bubbles, are blown in the economy, which artificially boosts the prices of their assets, and also the assets of the middle class. So the middle class gets thrown a bone in all of this, so that they remain content with their meager assets getting a boost as well. But it's those at the socio-economic top of the pyramid, the ones who own most of the assets anyway, who get the lion's share of the benefit. Indeed, if measured by household income, then the top 10% of earners in the USA own about 77% of the wealth in the country, while the bottom 50% of earners own less than 2% of the wealth. Now, imagine how much of that 77% of wealth is comprised of stocks, bonds, and real estate. And you can see why the Fed's monetary policies, as enumerated so clearly by Ben Bernanke, to prop up the stock market, the bond market, the real estate market, you can begin to see what part of society these policies truly favor. And I'll tell you, it's probably not you, and it's definitely not the bulk of the population. So as these policies are perpetuated, and we roll from one crisis to another, and each recession is worse than the last, and each recovery is weaker than the last, most people end up in weaker and weaker financial and economic circumstances as their wealth is gradually but steadily drained away, their assets are bought up by the top upper classes, and the worsening economic imbalances and inefficiencies mean that there are fewer good job opportunities and therefore weaker and weaker wages. And in the midst of all of these deteriorating conditions, another recession hits, perhaps accompanied by a full-on financial crisis, as well as, in the most recent case, a pandemic, and therefore people become especially desperate. They have been set up for becoming especially desperate, due in large part by the very policies that they thought they were benefiting from in the past, but which were actually setting them up to be in such a precarious financial position when anything economically bad happened that they would by default be desperate and vulnerable and looking for any financial security they could find, and believing that the Fed's money printing, 0% interest rates, and quantitative easing, and the government's huge emergency spending and bailout programs, believing that these policies had helped them in the past, and even helped boost the economy overall, naturally they don't just accept these policies again, but they beg for them, they demand them, even as they are bigger than ever before, and therefore will harm them, the middle and lower classes, in a bigger way than ever before, but they think they need it anyway. And so, again, more than ever before, they will have their remaining wealth and assets drained from them, driving them down into even deeper levels of economic strain, hardship, and distress, when all of the dust settles and the next weak recovery, of course weaker than the one before, comes around in a year or 2 or 5 or whenever, and it's like the frog being boiled in a pot. The heat builds slowly and steadily, so the frog doesn't fully realize it's being boiled alive until the water is bubbling and it's already too late. So you, the middle and lower classes of America, wake up to this now. You have to see what these repeated wash, rinse, repeat policies, the constant cycle of the cheap money being pumped into the system through the big banks, the 0% interest rates, and bailing out everyone, but especially the largest and most powerful corporations and institutions, you have to wake up to the reality of this and start to fight this. It's not good for you. In the short term, it feels like it's good for you, but collectively, your wealth is being eroded away. It is being transferred to the people at the top, to the socio-economic and political elite. As long as they can convince you that what they're doing is in your best interest and that it's necessary time after time for saving the economy, saving your jobs, saving your houses and wages, etc., well, then they'll never have to stop this process. It will all continue until the middle class has disappeared and we have only an impoverished underclass and a ruling elite class, slums and gated mansion communities, and the have-it-alls and the have-it-no-longers. With each recession now, with each economic crisis, this process of wealth redistribution gets further along in its course and in its severity. And it is completely reliant on the middle class going along with it. Stop going along with it. Speak out against it. Tell other people to resist it as well. Spread the word. Let the masses know, your friends and your family, this has to end if it's not already too late. This might be the last crisis. After this, the country might look very different and the economy might be drastically transformed. This terrible trend is occurring right now, more aggressively than ever before, and if the economy is damaged as much as I think it will be, and the population is impoverished as much as it might be, then that will seep into politics for sure, and we can only imagine what kind of wickedness could end up manifesting in that sphere, given how desperate and angry huge swaths of the population will be. This is a horrible situation. You have to help fight these policies, end this wealth transfer, stop supporting this process, save America, save the middle class, save yourselves.